Yesterday, Donald Trump gave his acceptance speech for the Republican nomination at the RNC. And people started calling into C-SPAN in droves, saying that they were Democrats who were quitting the party, would become Republicans, and would vote for Donald Trump, mostly because the left has begun embracing a fringe extremist ideology, that they were socialists, or that the Democrats were supporting violent riots and crime. And now we can see the desperation coming from the Democratic Party. Even after everything we've seen with 32 people dead, even after last night, where Rand Paul got attacked by an angry mob and people leaving the RNC were being attacked and harassed, Joe Biden still cannot give a full-throated condemnation of the violence. In fact, he calls for more action, and other far-left Democrats call for more action. But regular people have had enough. And now the backfire against Democrats for supporting the riots has gone from bad to worse. I'm going to show you that, in fact, many of these extremists out rioting don't even care about these causes. It's just an excuse to destroy, to be violent. Many of these people embrace overtly racist ideologies, and we've had enough. Did you know that today is the 57th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech? In it, he said that he dreams that one day his children will be judged based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Think about what the left is proposing today with books like White Fragility or How to Be Anti-Racist, where they tell you you must discriminate. How is what the left doing playing into Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream? It isn't. These people have become insanely racist and violent, and I've had enough. Now, in this video from Benny Johnson, he says the amount of Democrats calling into C-SPAN during the GOP convention saying they're switching parties is insane. There was one point that really stood out to me. It's at the 7-minute mark. A woman says, with an accent, that she fled socialism and that she would lay her life on the line to defend America. And I think that's how most people in this country feel. I believe there's a lot of people who just blindly hate Donald Trump and are willing to become overtly racists because they hate him and they'll follow the trends. But I think regular people have woken up and they're pushing back against this. And now, because of that, Donald Trump is going to win. But let me show you all of the reasons why I think this. And we'll start with how the media is finally starting to accept this is how Joe Biden loses. And it's not even an exaggeration. The Atlantic literally says this is how Biden loses. Nothing will harm a campaign like the wishful thinking, fearful hesitation, or sheer complacency that fails to address what voters plainly see. Don Lemon said it. The riots are beginning to show up in focus groups, in polls. And now Don Lemon is calling for Joe Biden to directly denounce the violence, but Joe Biden can't do it. Instead, all he says is, hey, it's Donald Trump's fault. Forgetting, I suppose, that Democrats actually endorsed and supported all of this. And the funny thing is, Joe Biden still calls for more, quote unquote, action. I think we've had enough. I think 32 people being dead is enough. But let's go through the stories. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. You can donate physical objects over at a P.O. box I got here. But the best thing you can do, share this video or subscribe to my second channel over at youtube.com/timcastnews, where I put up more segments throughout the day. I have several channels, but you can check that one out. And if you want to help this video, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and share it if you really want to support me. Here's what The Atlantic writes after a bit of fluff. They say, it's no use dismissing their words as partisan talking points. They are effective ones, and this is in reference to Donald Trump and calling for law and order. Backed up by certain facts. Trump will bang this loud, ugly drum until Election Day. He knows that Kenosha has placed Democrats in a trap. They've embraced the protests and the causes that drive them. The third night of the Democratic convention was consumed with the language and imagery of protest, as if all Americans watching were activists. Perhaps you saw it. The guy wearing the cape, singing the famous protest song, showing images of people kneeling and raising a fist. Do you know what regular Americans are starting to see when they see people raising their fist? They're seeing violence, destruction, death. 30 people had died at the point that the DNC decided to show this imagery as if people support it. Regular people are saying enough. The Atlantic goes on. On Monday, the day after Blake's shooting, Biden and his vice presidential nominee, Senator Kamala Harris, released statements expressing outrage. The next day, Biden's spokesperson released a statement opposing burning down communities and needless destruction. And on Wednesday, Biden, after speaking with the Blake family, condemned both the initial incident and the subsequent destruction. Burning down communities is not protest, he pleaded in video. It's needless violence. He said the same after George Floyd's killing. How many Americans have heard him? In the crude terms of a presidential campaign, voters know that the Democrats mean it when he denounces police brutality, but less so when he denounces riots. To reach the public and convince it otherwise, Biden has to go beyond boilerplate and make it personal, memorable. He won't, however. Joe Biden won't do it because too many of the Democrats and their voters are extremists. That's what they've fomented. They have fostered this group of people desperate to fight Donald Trump. They squeezed out the last little bits of what racism could be. And I have a theory. Why is it that the left has been changing the definition of racism? I think the reason is it's the only weapon they have against Donald Trump. And now that they have Donald Trump, a president who is not particularly, he's not racist, they have nothing left to do but change the definition in order to somehow maintain that political attack. Here's what Joe Biden said today. Oh, I'm sorry, this is yesterday night. Remember, every example of violence Donald Trump decries has happened on his watch, under his leadership, during his presidency. And we can hear from the likes of many commentators like Cernovich and Styx Hexenhammer. Styx says, getting a little nervous, are we, Joe? Considering it's happening in blue cities and states almost exclusively under Democratic leadership, and your party refuses to disavow it, I'd be nervous too. Mike Cernovich says, you sound nervous. He is nervous. They're getting desperate, very desperate. The thing is, Democrats did overtly support this, and they still do. I'm not exaggerating. Steve Guest says, after Senator Rand Paul was surrounded by the violent left-wing mob in D.C. last night, recent comments made by prominent Democrats are striking. Squad member Ayanna Pressley called for targeting GOP officials with unrest in the streets. Joe Biden called Pressley really smart back in June. As violent rioting occurred across Democrat-controlled city, Biden's eventual running mate Kamala Harris said protesters should not let up. In 2018, Nancy Pelosi says, I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. And he also mentions that Maxine Waters said if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, in a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them. Well, I think many people could argue they're not literally saying to be violent. What do you think needs to occur in order for the violence to persist? At a certain point, with 30 people dead, you'd think the Democrats would be like, guys, no more action, okay? We've had enough. The point has been driven home. Quite the contrary, though. Absolutely not. Just a little while ago, today, Joe Biden said, we can't let George Floyd and Jacob Blake become just another pair of hashtags. This is a moment for action. It's long past time we reform policing, reverse systemic racism, and make our communities safer. What do you mean by action? Is he saying pass laws and reform? Sure, I suppose. But I think this language is particularly dangerous right now. You have people going out and engaging in what you would call direct action. That's what they call it. And it's resulted in 32 people dying. At this point, I would be very careful about my language. Now, I get it. To be fair, I think Joe Biden's trying to say policy action or otherwise. But I think what this shows is that even after everything we've seen, with 9 minutes of people calling into C-SPAN saying, I've had it with the Democratic Party, Joe Biden still can't just say in very plain words, enough already. Stop. We've had too much. The reality is the ideology the Democrats have embraced and are trying to use to win is a dangerous and disgusting and extremist ideology. And that's why he keeps saying more, more, more. He knows what the Democratic Party has become. They have pushed out, excised the moderate liberals, people like me. I'm not voting for the Democrats anymore. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. They did it because they're extremists and they scare me and they scare other people. Today is the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. And I want to show you something. I have a dream. The speech. Quote, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, by the content of their character. Martin Luther King, 1963. That was a year before the Civil Rights Act was passed, and it was several years, 4 years, before Loving v. Virginia. Mixed race people couldn't even live together in many states while Martin Luther King was giving that speech. Where are we today? I want you to reflect upon what Joe Biden represents with his calls for ending systemic racism. I want you to reflect upon the books that are reaching the top of the charts among the left. That way you can understand why I am no longer willing to support any of these Democrats. And to be fair, it's not like I voted for them in 2016 or 2012. Anyway, I felt betrayed by Barack Obama. Do you believe that the left today is working to uphold the dream of Martin Luther King Jr.? The answer is no, they're not. And I'm going to show you. Don't take my word for it. Ibram X. Kendi, prophet of anti-racism, says, the defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, if it is creating equity, then it's anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. This book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is telling the left to be racist, to judge people not on the content of their character, but on the color of their skin. That is what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the left are supporting right now, and I will have nothing to do with it. In California, as most of you know, if you follow my content, they're voting to repeal from the Constitution of California the civil rights provision preventing discrimination based on race in public accommodation or contracting or jobs, public employment, because they are avowed racists who spit on the dream of Martin Luther King Jr. And this is Amazon. How to Be an Anti-Racist currently sits at number 13. So here we go. It's the number one bestseller in human rights, the number one in civil rights, the number one in political advocacy, and number 13 altogether. You also have White Fragility. White Fragility, written by a woman who claims to be a racist uncomfortable around minorities. The left is taking their cues from people who are telling them to be racists. I'm not going to support that. I'm sorry. And that's why Joe Biden won't come out and just say enough. It's why he's still coming out and saying we must continue the fight and have more action. While he's not directly, in my opinion, calling for violence, some people might view it as such, and some people who oppose him might say it's irresponsible nonetheless. But they don't care because they are racists and they want you to be racist. And they're going around and attacking people based on race. Now, ultimately, I don't think they really care about any of these causes. I don't think so. And I'm going to show you a sad example. Widow of retired police captain killed by looters gives emotional speech at RNC conference saying she relives horror every day. This was one of the most gut-wrenching, sad things I've ever seen. Ann Dorn told the story about how Captain David Dorn died during the riots because he got up to protect his friend's store and they killed him and they live streamed him lying on the ground dying. Captain Dorn, David Dorn, he was a black man. There were no great riots for him. Nobody came out and smashed windows or did anything. There was no outrage because it's not really about these individuals. It's just about the opportunity to do so. And the story about a retired police captain dying doesn't do enough for anybody. I can't tell you why they riot or when they will. But we also got very little play in national media for this man. Of course, the media does cover it. It doesn't break into the news cycle. But I think the greatest bit of evidence to prove they don't actually care about any of these causes is an excuse. Senator Rand Paul claims cop saved his life after protesters confronted him near White House. I find this story from the Daily Beast interesting because they're trying to claim that in videos he wasn't actually attacked simply because cops defended him. But why did an angry mob surround and try to attack Rand Paul? For no reason. As it turns out, on June 11th, Rand Paul issued a press release. Senator Rand Paul introduces the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act that would ban no-knock warrants. Rand Paul has been a staunch advocate for justice for Breonna Taylor. So why would they surround him, screaming at him, asking him about Breonna Taylor? Why would he need police to protect him as they lunge at him and then raise the bike? Why would Rand Paul need to ask the officer if he was okay? Why are they attacking him? He supports them, or at least to a certain degree he does, because they don't actually care about these causes. They don't. I'm sorry. They just pretend to. Over on with this, I have another tweet for you from Jason Rantz. He points out how on CNN, Kirsten Power says there's very little rioting. This is the media's narrative. It's why they're claiming that Rand Paul wasn't really attacked. It's desperation. They're desperate to do anything to make you believe everything's fine. It's very little rioting. It's just 32 people who have died. It doesn't matter, huh? It does matter. It absolutely does. Avowed racists are marching through our streets, following overtly racist ideologies. They're top-selling books on Amazon. They're destroying. They're killing. They're burning people's businesses to the ground. Why won't Joe Biden stand up and say no to each and every one of these people? Donald Trump has no problem doing it. Don Lemon wants him to do it. He calls on Joe Biden to stand at a podium addressing the violence. Joe Biden won't do it. Of course he won't. He needs the support of the extremists because the Democrats are embracing extremist ideology that, again, is contrary to the vision of Martin Luther King Jr., to the dream. After Senator Rand Paul was surrounded, Ayanna Pressley, what she said in the past is striking. I know I mentioned this. Just one more time, I'll say it. Unrest in the streets. Well, you got it. And now they're blaming the people who want to defend their homes. The McCloskeys, this young man in Kenosha from Antioch, only about a 20-minute drive, who was out there with an emergency medical kit, trying to protect buildings and render aid to people who were hurt. And they tried to kill him. We now know, based on witness accounts, that the scuffle broke out between this young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, because someone tried stealing his gun from him. Someone then fired around, so he turned and fired at the individual, striking him in the head. He then ran, and people tried taking his gun from him. Someone stomped his face. He got hit in the head with a skateboard, and he defended himself. He's been arrested for it. Maybe they'll deem it to be self-defense, but at any rate, they're blaming you, the person who just wants to live in peace. I will not be supporting this. Kevin McCarthy said, hours after Nancy Pelosi labeled Republicans as domestic enemies, leftist mobs harassed, intimidated, and tried to incite violence against Republicans in the streets. Her reckless comments have consequences. She should immediately condemn these assaults against democracy. I agree. But you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't matter. We know that they've long supported the violence, and now they're going to face the brunt of it. In Michigan, according to the Trafalgar Group, Donald Trump is now leading Joe Biden by 2 points. Amazing. Trump was down for the longest time. He started improving in the polls. Support for Black Lives Matter was dwindling because the riots were getting worse and worse. And still, Pelosi attacks Republicans. Still, Joe Biden hides in his basement. And that's what we can expect from them. It's what's been happening for quite some time. We have political polls showing basically the same thing from Trafalgar Group, and now we can see it. Trending. Trump's odds of winning rise 50-50 for the first time in 92 days. You know, in 2016, they said Trump had no chance of winning. Some said it was mathematically impossible, and Hillary Clinton has had a major lead in many battleground states. The polls deceived Hillary Clinton. She thought she didn't need to do the work, and she lost. Maybe Donald Trump will lose. Maybe the polls are correct this time. I still don't believe it. Maybe these phone calls into C-SPAN are all an anomaly, just a vocal minority. And in reality, many more people hate Donald Trump than like him. Maybe with all these NBA players and celebrities coming out screeching about Trump, regular people go and vote. Somehow, I just don't buy it. You know why? Yesterday, I read a story from the New York Times talking about a man who was busy dealing with work and COVID and trying to make sure his kids had the resources they need to live productive lives. He didn't pay attention to politics at all. Then the riots came to Kenosha, and he started to realize the Democrats were doing nothing. If this man was sitting on the fence and not caring, that says a lot. It says to me that most people probably still don't. These Beltway politicos aren't paying attention to what's actually going on in middle America across this country. And they think everyone hates Donald Trump. But when you go to small town America, when you go to these swing states, it seems like many people are just like, I don't know. I'm shocked to find that this man was on the fence and just didn't know or didn't really care. Some people went out to buy guns for the first time. I went the other day to a local gun store. They were out of ammo. Basically, the only thing they had was birdshot. They had, some ammo, but they were mostly out. They told me, don't worry, we're going to try and get as much as we can, come back tomorrow. I did. They had some, but they weren't willing to sell all that much because, well, people are buying it in droves. They're running out of ammo across the board. You mean to tell me that these gun shops that are being picked clean, these regular people becoming first-time buyers, you think they're supporting Joe Biden in this? No, they're scared of the riots. And over the past several months, the Democrats have just continually embraced and supported this. So either you've got people in the middle who just don't know, and the people who do have been running full speed to the gun store. I'm worried for the people who weren't paying attention. But here it is. Social unrest will strengthen Trump's hands, from the Financial Times. And this sort of wraps up the point of this segment. This is how Joe Biden loses. We know they've supported it. The polls are swinging in Trump's favor, and they're embracing extremist ideology. Financial Times says, if this week marks a turning point in the 2020 presidential race, it may owe as much to the events in Wisconsin as the virtual Republican National Convention. Trailing in the polls, incumbent Donald Trump was already counting on a message about the threat of civil disorder to help him reach undecided and moderate voters. But events conspired to give him an unexpected boost. Last Sunday, with what happened with Jacob Blake, we know what happened. The mayhem amplifies Mr. Trump's law and order message and poses an uncomfortable challenge for Democrat Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They say many Democratic mayors, city council members, and progressive protest movements are calling for cuts to the police department, funding, and personnel. In New York, de Blasio disbanded the city's plainclothes unit that tracked down violent criminals and illegal firearms. Shootings soared. We know it. In a new poll, 59% of voters said violent crime was very important to how they vote, making it a top 5 issue. It wasn't in the top 10 in 2016, and a recent survey in Wisconsin, a swing state, found that support for Black Lives Matter has declined over the summer while there is rising concern about violence. Meanwhile, national gun purchases are soaring. The FBI conducted a record 3.9 million background checks for firearm purchases in June. A year earlier, there were just 2.3 million. Republican convention speakers have sought to tap these concerns by arguing that Biden and Harris should have spoken out more forcefully against civil unrest and in support of police. They have also criticized the Democrats for proposing new restrictions in firearm purchases, including a Biden proposal for a ban to ban a range of guns. And there it is. You've lost me completely. Earlier this year, many of you probably know this, I straight up said to the people I live and work with, no guns in my house, period. Don't want to hear it. Then COVID happened, and I said, maybe I should start looking into this. It's a little difficult, so I kind of said, whatever. Then the riots happened, and I heard the helicopters near my home, and I heard the sirens near my home, and I filled out every bit of paperwork I could as fast as I could. And I went to that store, and I said, give me what you got. I went a perfect 180 degrees in the other direction. I will not support any candidate now who is trying to enforce any of these gun control measures. I'm sorry. End of story. I remember a couple of years ago when I was saying there's probably some restrictions that make sense. Now, no, I'm not going to go ahead and play any games asserting that the record number of first-time buyers are doing it because they're criminals. They're not. And they definitely need to get proper training. There's a real risk, but I take security. I take security seriously. But I will take freedom over security any day. And that means if there may be people walking around with guns, so be it. I'll be responsible for myself and my security, knowing that these people are trying to take our police away. They're overtly racist. And now their politicians like Biden also want to take the guns away from everybody. Now, I'll tell you what. You want to talk about elite urban privilege? I'll tell you about it. I felt like I didn't need to defend myself. I felt like I didn't need weapons because the cops right around the corner. No problem. I call them. They'll take care of it. Now I can see that they're coming after the police. The police are demoralized and threatened. And I'm going to have to rely on myself. I was wrong 100%. And now I've gone the completely other direction. And I'm not going to play games with Joe Biden. If Joe Biden wants to ban a range of guns, he can go do it somewhere else. But when people are going around killing others and 32 people are now dead, you'd have to be insane to say, oh, sure, Joe Biden, come on, just take my weapon from me. People are marching through residential neighborhoods. You're nuts. Joe Biden's lost it. People right now need real leadership, and they're not going to get it from Biden. They're saying Donald Trump's only issue right now is the riots. So what? They say that's the only thing he's got, so he's going to focus on it, not COVID. Don't care. It's true. I do not believe any of these Democrats will do what needs to be done to stop the extremism. But it's not even that. I'll tell you what, right now, a lot of people I know say they're going to vote Libertarian, Green Party, their third party vote. That's fine. My bigger fear is that this far left extremism that I've referenced earlier in this segment, that flies in the face of the dream of Martin Luther King Jr., it's growing, it's expanding. They're in our cultural institutions. They're painting their slogans in our streets. They're avowed racists, calling for racial discrimination. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't succeed. I know it may be cliche or a meme a bit for everybody who watches my content because I mention, maybe at least a couple times a month that I'm mixed race. But it's because of this that I do. Maybe a lot of, maybe it becomes tired, kind of like Ben Shapiro mentioning that his wife is a doctor. But I'm going to tell you, when I see this, you have to understand that it has a real impact on my family and my thoughts for the future and my potential children. It reminds me of the stories I was told by my mom about growing up when we didn't have these protections. And now I can see these people who are attacking the dream of one of the greatest civil rights leaders we've ever seen in our history, in history in general. They're gaining ground. It must be stopped. It must be opposed. Right now, Donald Trump is saying, keep your weapons, protect yourself. Donald Trump has proven he's a champion of the economy and can get us back on track. And he's been opposing the extremism and the violence since day one, and he is not aligned with the extreme far left racists. I'm going to do what I can to oppose the violence, supporting someone who will say enough to the riots, not these half-witted, dim-witted, comments from Joe Biden. And I'm going to support somebody who overtly opposes the extreme racism of the far left. That means I'm going to be voting for Donald Trump. And I'm a liberal, and I'm going to be a liberal after I do it. Of course, they'll try and argue I'm conservative or whatever, or I'm, right wing, but it's just absolutely not true. My economic views are very left wing, pretty left. I make jokes. I took a political compass test, pretty far left, falling in the libertarian socialist quadrant. I think if people actually saw me go through a list of policy proposals, they'd be like, wow, this guy's a liberal, because it's true. But I oppose racism. These people who are encroaching on our cultural institutions are almost identical to the white supremacists of way back when. In fact, I've seen people posting memes about white riots during the civil rights era, claiming that it's their turn now. I'm like, yeah, you're the same thing. I oppose you. I oppose this. And we need to put an end to it and get back on track. Not Joe Biden. The Democrats are now reaping the rewards. Watch this video from Benny Johnson, 9 minutes of Democrats saying enough. It's powerful stuff. I tweeted about it. Check out my Twitter account, youtube.com/Timcast. I'll leave it all there. I'll leave it there. Twitter.com/Timcast. What did I say, YouTube? Twitter.com/Timcast. I don't know, whatever. The point is, check it out. My next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast News. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.